A very good evening, everybody. A very warm welcome to the members of the Thinkly community to yet another edition of Thinkly Talks. Today, I'm honestly delighted, honored, privileged to have with us one of the most eminent personalities of corporate India, Mr. R Gopalakrishnan. Sir, a big welcome to Thinkly. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Vivek. I'm
curious
about Thinkly, so I'm happy to be here.
That's great, sir. And thanks so much for taking the time out while you are away, at Kunur. So really appreciate you taking the time out.
Thank you.
Yeah. So sir doesn't really need an introduction. I mean, he's so well known, but just by way of a quick background, I just want to kind of walk you through sir's creds. And he studied his physics at Calcutta University from St. Xavier's College, engineering at IIT Kharagpur, the advanced management program at Harvard. Subsequently, he served as the chairman of Unilever Arabia, MD of Brook Bond Lipton, vice chairman of Hindustan Lever, director of Tata Sons, and several Tata Group companies. He currently serves as the non-executive chairman of Castrol India and the independent director of PTI. And as if that's not been enough, he's an author of 18 books. In fact, I just realized there's 22 books if you were to include the 4 languages that he's been translated in. Books like the Inside the Boardroom, The Six Lenses, The Made in India. So, sir, you've really been keeping busy, and it's really been a sterling, amazing career.
Mal you. You're very generous in your comments. I'm trying to do my little bit.
Well, sir, it's an honor to have you here. And I think before we kind of get on to, getting advice from you about the career, I would love to really understand your story as to how did you really pursue the career that you did in FMCG. I believe you started off in 67 as an analyst, I think in the computers division, and then you moved across to marketing and then general management. So, just if you could just walk us through how much of it was really by chance or, by things out of your control, and how much of it was really planned, would love to hear your journey.
In a summary, what I planned didn't work out, and what I did not plan worked out. Now, you can call it luck, you can call it coincidence. I was fascinated to study what I studied. Physics, because I was very taken up with the developments in atomic physics and nuclear physics. So names like Oppenheimer, which is now a film, names like Niels Bohr, were all sort of proverbial names in my mind. And when you're young, and then solid state physics took a deep place in my mind. I therefore pursued electronics. And amongst the first few graduates in what was then called EDP, computer science, nowadays IT. It was very exciting because William Shockley had just got the Nobel Prize 15 years before I graduated. And so you felt you were right in the cutting edge. Like today, some youngsters may feel about working in AI, rather than desktop computer programming. And I was determined to have a career in computers. Luckily for me, I got an offer from Hindustan Lever, who were recruiting computer analysts for their newly formed computer department, which I joined. And in the interview, I don't think anybody in the interview board knew what to ask me about computers because it was all so new. So they asked me about marketing and concluded by saying, would you join the marketing department? And I felt offended, to be honest. At 21, you're allowed to be a bit cocky and arrogant. And I said, no, I don't want to join a job where I have to sell dalda and soap. Anyway, I went into computers, but the marketing director told me as an aside, I think you'll make a good marketing guy. If you ever change your mind, knock on my door. He was an expatriate person. But as it so happened, 4.5 years after banging my head on the wall, during which time I did autocoder programming, IBM 1401, IBM 1620, Fortran. I even learned IBM 360. This whole activity was heading nowhere. Unions were against computers. Nothing was happening. And there were not many computer jobs, frankly. There was IBM and there was TCS. And then I remembered the marketing director and I went back. And this is what I mean by being unplanned. He said, very good. Come along. You start training as a salesman and supervisor and learn the ropes. So I was sent off for field training, almost like a fresh trainee. But since I started at 21, I was only 25. That's the age many people begin their career after IIT, IIM.
Right.
And so my career carried on until at some stage, My boss said, you have a lot of exposure to Indian markets. What about some international markets? And I was put in charge of exports. And then I had a lot of business in the Middle East. Unilever said, this guy looks okay. This is the unplanned part of your career. They offered me the job of being chairman of Unilever Arabia with my base in Jeddah. So it's the first time an Indian from the Indian company was being offered the job of a CEO. Earlier, Indians had gone in staff roles or at a more junior role or at the boss as a director, So I grabbed it, and there were a lot of interesting life experiences with my family at that time in Jeddah. When I came back, they asked me to be the managing director of Brook Bond. So I went in from computers to sales to marketing to general management to international marketing, came back, and then I was vice chairman of the company when I met Ratan Tata. And he asked me whether I'd be interested in helping him to implement a master plan that he had prepared.
Right.
And again, it's a chance. I felt I had known everything about shampoo and soap and dalda, but knew nothing about how electricity is generated, how software code is written, because everything had changed, of course, how steel is made, how trucks are made. So I made that switch as well. So it's been a wonderful journey, a lot of coincidences, and I suspect everybody's career has, the turning points are coincidences. The straight paths are planned. Though we tend to think that we have planned the whole thing.
Right. No, absolutely. And in fact, as you were recounting your experience, I was just going back my career thought, because I started off wanting to be somebody who would actually go on and become a physicist, So after my graduation in physics from St. Xavier's, Mumbai, I somehow landed up doing my MBA here. And for the first, year or so, I was actually quite disappointed, always kind of regretting that I didn't continue there. And I think now in hindsight, I look back and I'm kind of glad I didn't go down that path, because it's one thing to love Carl Sagan and to love Cosmos and to think about it. But it's, I think, something else to build a career. So do you have any remorse, or are you kind of glad that these twists and turns happened the way it happened for you?
Well, since I didn't influence the twists and turns, I took the twists and turns that came my way. So it's like a rail with the track is leading left or right, and I just went. So I have no regrets. And I'll tell you why, listening to your own experience and, whatever I narrated. I believe strongly, and I would say to your audience, remember what I'm about to say. There is this principle called the principle of obliquity. That if you aim to do something in your career, it may or may not work. Just like in billiards or snooker, you sometimes have to aim off the edge of the table to net a ball or to hit the ball so that it goes off at an angle. In carom, you do the same thing. Life is a carom board or a billiards table or a snooker table. And the principle of obliquity basically says that if you aim to do the right thing, then the right result will follow. If you aim to do what is right, as a result, then you may not get there. So even in promotions, I would say, don't aim to become general manager by the time you're 30. Aim to do the right things to put yourself in that position. It may or may not happen. But if you do the right things, this is the karmic philosophy, I suppose, saying, it'll be familiar to all Indians. You do the right thing and the right things will happen. You aim for the right goals, but the right thing may not happen. Those who play golf or sports will also know that isme chakka marna hi hai, then you probably get out.
Right. Absolutely. I think well said. So, sir, moving to really to the topic of today, which is about how to supercharge our career and how to really think about career planning, as somebody has to think about over the next 2 to 3 to 4 decades of career. And like you rightly pointed out, there are so many twists and turns, something which happenstance, and some things which are in our control, or a lot of them are not in our control. How should somebody think about it? Because obviously when you start off now, let's say after an MBA or after your graduation, and now you're planning your career, and then the careers nowadays also are really changing, because gone are the days where you could get into an industry and stay with it for 2-3 decades. There are things there are jobs which are getting obsolete and everything. So any advice on that front? And a lot of questions coming in, which I'll just move to, but any advice at a very broad level? How should somebody think about the career over a 2 to 4 decades kind of a time span?
I hesitate to give advice on how to plan your career, but I can share my experience. And if somebody wants to take that as advice, that's fine. If somebody thinks that's rubbish, it's for the older generation, that's also okay with me. There are only two things, in my view, which should form your compass in your journey, in your career. The first is, are you enjoying yourself? And the second is, are you learning something new every month?
Right.
If these two conditions are fulfilled, you'll have a wonderfully satisfying career. If you chase money, I doubt if you'll have a satisfying career. If you do these two things that I said, learn to enjoy what you do and do what you enjoy. And second, keep learning. It doesn't matter that you're 2 years away from retirement. Then the chances are your career will also be nice. If I use that yardstick, if I may use that word, or that measure, I'm very lucky. Because I couldn't have said all this if you asked me when I was 25 years old. Obviously, I couldn't have. But in hindsight, I think I was learning all the time. In my entire career of 50 years, there were probably 3-4 years somewhere in between in patches where either for some reason or the other didn't enjoy myself or I felt I wasn't learning. But for the rest of the 90% of the time, I felt I was really having fun. Right. And that's a gift. That's a gift. Even if you prayed for, God can't give it to you. You have to earn it. You have to earn it. So that's what I would say as my broad experience. And if you think it's decent advice, you may use it. If you think it's rubbish, throw it out the window.
That sounds great. I mean, just enjoy your job and, always go with a curious mind and keep learning. And I think that's the only way to survive when you look at it. So to that, so there's a question from Sahil. He's really seen that as you shifted your career from IT to a management career, did you have to very, explicitly think about, equipping yourself with new skills, or was it more on-job training, or did you kind of, think that you had to go and, reskill yourself, or any thoughts on that? Whenever people do a career,
yeah, I think it's a very good question that your questioner has asked, because yes, I had to learn new skills. It was a completely different track. I was used to running my train on a familiar rail track, and suddenly I was put into from broad gauge to meter gauge or meter gauge to narrow gauge. You had to re-rudder yourself. I'm a strong believer that in your career, to keep learning, you must not be doing the same job in the same geography, in the same function, with the same people for too long. That is a killer of learning. Now, many people don't think this is very important. In my own career, I have had 15 bosses over 50 years. An average of every 3 years, I change a boss. I didn't change a boss, the boss got changed. And I have not been in the same company, although people may say, well, Unilever is Unilever. I've worked in Unilever in India, I worked in Unilever in Arabia, I worked in Unilever in the UK. I worked in Tatas, and I've been associated with several Tata subsidiaries. So I've had a varied sort of experience. And I'll tell you why I'm saying variety is very important for a career. Variety doesn't mean you have to change your job, your company. You may change your role within the company, which is what I did. And that way you can maybe have a career for 30, 40 years in one company. But on the other hand, you may want to change your job. That I'm not sort of advising on that. But the reason why you must keep changing every 3-4 years, and there are 4 vectors on which you can have change. I'd like to point that out. The vector of function, the vector of location, the vector of domain. You're making soap or you're making a car, and the vector of relationships. These are the 4 dimensions. Don't change all the 4 in one go. If you've been a marketing manager in Hindustan Lever, don't try to become the technical director or technical manager of Tata Motors. That's and firstly, they won't take you, but if they did, that won't be a very good thing. And because, it brings you humility and the admission of ignorance. Ki mujhe ye aata nahi hai. And that is a very important feature of a career. Every 4 years to know that I thought I'm a great tiger, because we all think we are tigers. Most of us think we are Steve Jobs or Elon Musk. We are not, but we do think so. And we realize that there is much more to learn. And if you're in a learning mode, humility comes automatically.
Right.
The greatest danger to a successful career is your arrogance. Absolutely. But anyway, I'm deviating from the question you asked. I hope I answered the question you gave it.
So you're not deviating. Please feel free. Please keep it, free-willing. I think, we just hanging on to your words. There's a very interesting point from somebody by the pseudonym of Darth Vader. That's really a character from Star Wars. But he's saying from the outside, Tatas and HUL seem two different worlds. Were there any challenges while jumping from one to another, especially so much later in your career? When you would have typically thought, you just kind of consolidate, having to decide. And like you rightly said, moving from FMCG to electricity to motors. How was that whole experience?
I must say it was very challenging and full of learning. When you're young, say you're below 35, you change. Typically, people change jobs from one startup to another startup, but in the same technology domain. Or they change from a FMCG company to another FMCG company. Or they change from a distribution-oriented company to another distribution, or research-oriented company from one pharma company to another pharma company. But when you change at a very senior age and level, I changed at 51, 52, then you're probably changing at an age when culture has to be understood. Right. And it's very difficult to learn culture. It's much easier to learn technicalities. Like if I don't know about electricity generation or motor cars, I could go and sit down, so long as I am humble enough to sit not with the general manager of the factory, but the assistant production manager. कि भाई ये foundry चलता कैसे है? मुझे समझाओ, मुझे आता नहीं है. I've forgotten all my engineering from 30 years ago. That's a good attitude to have. But the culture part was very different because, if you lived in, just to take as an example, if you lived in Tamil Nadu all your life, at the age of 55, you're transferred to be in Jalandhar. I mean, it can be hell of a challenge. The language, the customs, the ways of doing things. And in that sense, both were wonderful companies, Unilever and Tata. I have no doubt in my mind about that. But their ways of doing things were different. And I had to, it's like having a driving license in India for right-hand driving. And suddenly land up in Los Angeles thinking you have 30 years driving experience. So somebody gives you a car key where the GPS system is talking to you, turn left, turn right, and you don't know how to handle that car. It's exactly the same feeling. You know how to. When I failed my driving test in the UK, I was crestfallen. And the guy told me, "Sir, you have learned how to move the car, but not how to drive." And that's what happens when you change companies at a late stage. It was challenging, but since I didn't get fired, I suppose I survived it.
You did good, sir. So, touching upon one of the points that you brought up, you talked about this very, interesting point, which is really culture of an organization, right? And culture, for example, especially when people make the switches from one company to another, or sometimes within a department to another, or when they have a new boss. I think the biggest challenge that sometimes people have, because the skills are the same, their attitude is the same, but the culture around them kind of suddenly changes, right? What is the kind of advice that you have? Because, people, a lot of times they kind of grip that there are issues around politics, there are issues about, having a boss which has got a very different style of working. And I think a lot of the time that alone defines somebody's success, right? So any thoughts on that?
Technical skills are like vegetables or pieces of meat or chicken, and culture is the soup in which you place them.
Right.
The raw vegetables or even boiled vegetables or meat is of no use to you. It's only when it's put into the soup that it matters. And it depends on whether you put it into a tomato-based soup or a corn-based soup or a hot chili sour-based soup. So I think the underestimation of culture is one of the serious dangers that people have while making changes. What you have to do is to first recognize and be aware that culture is a very important part of a career, that you must understand. The second is culture by definition is not rational. if I'm a Tamil who has been in all my life in Tamil Nadu, if I go there and say, why do these Punjabis eat so much paneer, which is unknown in Tamil Nadu, they're not going to stop eating paneer because you have a question. Either you eat the paneer and join them, or you don't eat paneer. Conversely, if rasam is hot for a Punjabi, which it may not be, but some Punjabis may find it hot. Why do you eat such hot food? I don't know. It's culture. It's something that's come down. So you learn to adapt. And I think in planning your career, a lot of management institutions, company HR departments advise young people that they must have good IQ. So they put them through various tests and so on. They will always, if they don't know, they will be teaching them about Daniel Goleman and EQ, emotion quotient. But nobody teaches you about AQ, adaptability quotient.
Right.
But changing at a senior level requires AQ. And since nobody teaches it, you have to learn it for yourself. And that is the important part. IQ plus EQ plus AQ gives you a shot at the goal. If you don't have AQ, you go to get a shot at the goal.
Right. So I think adaptability is probably the most important thing, especially in today's fast-changing world, right? Because
and that also it must have guide rails. I remember one guy. He came for an interview to an Indian promoter-led company, and they said, "Ye kaam kara lo, kuch wo Munim ji se le lena," and he followed that because he thought he's showing AQ. When he came to Hindustan Lever, we said that doesn't work here. There is no Munim ji, and there is no adaptability. You have to readapt yourself back. He readapted. He was a young man and he had no problem. But I'm just saying, you must not adapt to the point of going against the grain of who you are.
Right.
And that's a very important point. Yahan pe aisa hi hota hai is not the right thing.
Right. Right. So there are quite a few questions talking about, really about the mid-career point of view. I mean, I would say that people, when they're in the 30s, typically people have started moving into what you could call as middle-level management. And some of them are now kind of, thinking about either switching jobs to kind of, maximize the potential that they have. Some of them are looking at switching industries. And some of them are actually looking at probably becoming entrepreneurs. You see a big wave of people towards late 20s and early 30s making the switch, right? What is the kind of advice that you've given to people who typically come to you and, asked about this? I mean, what should their decision be? Because obviously the advice would change from person to person based on their background or whatever. But any such things, I mean, that you kind of make somebody think about before they decide about switching a job, switching a career, or becoming an entrepreneur?
There are two levels of the questioning that I have been asked, and this is what I have advised. I hope it was useful, because that you have to ask the party who took the advice. The first question is, why do you want to switch?
Mm-hmm.
Switching is not a virtue in itself. So why do you want to switch? And then you can get a variety of answers, which I need not go into. But broadly speaking, is it because something is unacceptable to you in your current role, or you happen to have a boss who's bad, or is it the company that's bad, or you have stopped learning and so you're feeling bored? Those are all possible reasons. Don't run away from a bad boss or boredom.
Mm-hmm.
It is better to switch when you're at a high, when you're learning and sort of satisfied. Then if the person says, I'm here as marketing manager, somebody is taking me as a marketing director, or I want to go into entrepreneurship, I want to make, Chyawanprash or whatever product I've learned because I've got this magical formula from my grandfather. I say, fine, that will give you greater satisfaction. Go ahead and do it. But understand the culture. If it's a large company you're joining or a small company, what is the culture of the company? And if it is a startup, I'll say, understand what the startup culture should be. Why are you making a startup? Now, the short-term answer will always be, I got this secret, I've got this idea, I've got some initial funding from an angel investor or my grandfather or whatever. The point is that, particularly for startups, I've written a book, co-authored with my co-author. It's called Wisdom for Startups from Grown-ups.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody who's thinking of an entrepreneurial journey, not because I want to sell my books, might wish to read that book. Because grown-ups always have something to teach. You know, if every grandson rejected his grandfather totally and wholly, that would be a very poor transmission of family tradition. But if he accepts him wholly, then he'll become a stick in the mud. So you must learn ki chan been ke what do you take which is relevant for the future, and only you can do that. Grandfather would love it if I have grandsons now, and if they accepted everything I said, I'll be very happy. But I know that's not the right thing to do. So there are certain things that grown-ups have learned that keep the financial runway long. Second, you do the right things and the valuation will come. Don't work for valuation. Third, create a company which has a purpose, which you can sharpen and grow as time goes along. But look at the great entrepreneurs of the last century, and don't say, I'll never be Jamshedji Tata or Ghanshyam Das Birla or Mahindra. Say that I would like to be that way. So just like if you started taking science lessons, your teacher will tell you, think of Niels Bohr. You may not become a Niels Bohr, but how they learn to practice their science is something that you take interest in. So if you have these kinds of ideas sorted out in your mind, and it's very difficult to sort it out, by the way, if you're 32. I remember when I was 32 or 33, I got this great idea that I can make fantastic ice cream and, distribute ice cream. But when I applied myself to these sorts of questions, I realized that I'm not in the right track at that time. So timing is also very important in a startup when people go entrepreneurially. So that's the kind of advice I give. Be clear why you want to leave. Why do you want to jump from this particular role? Be clear what you want to jump to. Understand whether you are prepared to do the things that requires. When Roger Federer was 4, according to his biographer, he was very good in football. He was very good in squash. He was very good in tennis. They wanted him to be a footballer. But his father had given him a racket, a baby racket. And he said, I want to be a tennis player. In his family, they said, fine, go ahead and be a tennis player. And then he concentrated. He gave up football. And so you can't do everything at the same time. Ye bhi karna chahta hu, wo bhi karna chahta hu. And once you get that single-mindedness, entrepreneurs who succeed, in my opinion, there are some who are genius. Okay, if you ask me what is the path of Elon Musk or Steve Jobs, I think that's genius. There's no point trying to deconstruct genius. Then it ceases to be genius. Genius, by definition, is magical and mystical. But other people, and I think most of us are other people, we may fancy ourselves like Elizabeth Holmes did in Theranos, that we are all wearing turtleneck shirts and we are also Steve Jobs. But that doesn't make us Steve Jobs. Most of us are ordinary people with high ambitions, reasonable education. And that's when you have to undertake all these exercises and disciplines.
Wonderful, sir. So, you mentioned a very interesting point, which probably is not kind of really given a focus of. And lately, actually, there's been a lot of attention on it from psychologists and motivational coaches. You talked about the idea of purpose, about having a sense of purpose, right? Could you maybe elaborate a little bit on this? Because a lot of the time, people, when they are working in a corporate, they sometimes feel a little bit of shallowness. They sometimes say that, look, what am I doing this? It's like a treadmill and whatever, and I think a lot of the reason people escape or want to move to becoming a startup entrepreneurs because they feel that there's a larger calling otherwise. Could you help us elaborate on that? Because I think without a sense of purpose, you can't stay focused, you can't do well.
Yeah, I think it's a very fine question. When it's good, first of all, to consider a change when you're not in a depressed state, because your mind is not clear at that time. So because I'm on a treadmill, I have this place getting boring, I must have a change, in my opinion, is not a great idea. Now, if this point about purpose, I don't want to make it sound like high management philosophy, because then it loses its purpose. It can be very simple. I mean, when I know Jamshedji Tata was successful, Ghanshyam Das Birla was successful, and so on and so forth. Once people have become successful, their purpose becomes. But it is very simple. What William Hesketh Lever said in 1888 is, why do you want to sell soap all around the world? He said, I want to clean the teeming millions all around the world.
Right.
By making it that way, he brought in that hygiene was a very important factor in those days. That he wants to be global because there are millions of people all around the world. It was not just in England or Germany or somewhere that he wanted to do it. When Jamshedji Tata was asked, he said, because meri kamai unse aayi hai from the community. So in some way I have to return this to them. So there was a circularity idea in his mind. When John Cadbury started Cadbury's, he says, what are you trying to do? He says, life is tough. I want to bring sweetness into people's lives. So these are not very profound statements. And anybody can write such a statement. But I think it's got to have an otherness about it. मैं किसी और के लिए कर रहा हूं, अपने लिए नहीं. But if it is, मुझे valuation चाहिए, मुझे unicorn बनना है, decacorn बनना है, it's likely to be a flawed approach.
Right.
You look at Zoho, or you look at, there are very few profitable companies. I don't know, Mu Sigma may be a profitable company or approaching profitability. They are not in growth for the sake of growth. They are trying to do something else. So Swami Vivekananda said, and I always take inspiration from this. It's easy to quote Swami Vivekananda and then go away, but to practice it is always difficult. He said the first rule for success is be self-aware. मैं कौन हूं, मेरे किस चीज के लिए काबिल हूं. The second thing that he said is protect your resources. The air, the water, the employees, the vendors. Don't be scornful of them. The third thing he said is serve other people before serving yourself, especially for startup people. I would recommend that this is a very serious point, because many startup people give the impression, because I don't know what's happening inside their head and I go by newspaper reports, which are not necessarily right. They want to serve themselves first, get valuation and bail out. And the last thing that he said is take decisions firmly, but deal with it compassionately. This word compassion is very important. So I would recommend the same for your viewers.
Right. Wonderful. And I think a great takeaway point from what you just said is about this whole concept of otherness. I mean, unless we bring in the otherness, we'll never feel satisfied. We'll never see the joy in what we're doing. Otherwise, it'll just become a crazy rush for money, right?
Yeah, I know it doesn't sound very business-like and commercial, but some people say for every year of my life so far, I'm going to give 1,000 crores. And since I'm turning 60, I'm going to give 60,000 crores. It sounds very impressive when Economic Times publishes it. But frankly, that's not a purpose, And soon you find your ability to give the 60,000 crores has been limited by some other factors.
True. Yeah. Great point, sir. So, sir, touching upon the same point that we were talking about the mid-careers, there's a question here from Karishma. He said, for someone who's coming back to the workforce after a sabbatical, what tips would you share to ensure that you get the role and compensation you deserve? And I think, you could probably look at this thing from the context of especially of women who end up taking a break sometimes, You sometimes have entrepreneurs nowadays taking a break, and by the time they're ready to join back the workforce, their contemporaries are already ahead in the career and they don't necessarily get a break. So any thoughts around those, scenarios?
This overriding thought that I have, Vivek, is deserve before you desire.
Mm-hmm.
But second career people come desiring before they deserve.
Mm-hmm.
वो उल्टा सिक्का चलाते हैं.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in Tata's, I started a program which my colleagues executed with great distinction, I have to say, called SKIP, SCIP, which stands for Second Career Internship Program.
Mm-hmm.
This was back in 2002 or something, And when WFH and all were all unknown, in those days.
Right.
And what we did in SKIP was to take talented women, since our focus can be on women, it's only an example, but they are the more affected people, because there are smart girls who come out of IIT, IIM, who are trying to balance their career and home. And in the process, they are the ones who, and we said, we want to recruit you. If you finished your maternity, 1 or 2 children, whatever, 30, age group would be 30 to 40. Now you've forgotten, you're a bit rusty on your what you learned at IIT or IIM. We put them through a refresher course and we put them into an internship, because, some of them are even forgotten, because it's, one of the most marvelous things women do for society, I would say, is to raise a family. I mean, men don't, at least I didn't when I was young, give the credit to my wife and the ladies in my circle. I now, in hindsight, think they do a marvelous job, but we don't recognize it, because they don't bring moolah home. Once they've done that, they are under tremendous mental and professional stress. An internship program brings back to them an idea. If you're 35 and you're sent back to live in the hostel in IIT, you say, hell, is this how I lived 15 years ago? You can't believe it. You got used to 5-star or whatever. So we gave them an internship program. At the end of it, we asked them, would you like to work full-time, partly from home, or not work at all? And we found women falling into all the 3 categories. And I have to say that at least during the years I was there, many women preferred not to work full-time regular jobs. It would not be able to balance. And many of them said, we want to start up something on our own. This has given us a refresher. Or we would like to work from home, so the time zones and so on, I can go with my husband when he gets transferred to some other place. But I think almost all of them, maybe 75-80% of them, were grateful for the program and brought them back into the workforce. And I think that was, and since then, many other companies have also done it. Maybe even before that, some other companies did it. I think it's very important to bring such people. They may be managers turned entrepreneurs coming back, men, they may be women who've taken a break for some reason. Give them the opportunity to come back into the real world and assess what they want to do. Don't just recruit them and make them deputy HR manager in some particular place.
Right. No, and I think this programs, like you rightly said, has been becoming more and more popular now. And I've had some friends who've kind of, joined back the workforce, what they call it, the second innings programs, some of these. And I think a wonderful way to kind of, just like you said, just reorient them and to kind of ease them back in. So it's great. Moving along to another point, you're seeing more and more people now because of the whole explosion in the job opportunities. Some people are kind of, putting off doing their masters, their MBAs right after the finish their graduation. And then they look at doing, let's say from a good college, from a premium MBA college later on, right? What's really happening nowadays is that the MBA colleges, MBA programs from all these private institutions in India and abroad are just becoming very, very prohibitively expensive. If you look at it, I mean, now even from a decent program, you're talking about 40-50 lakhs in India, and of course, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars when you're looking at the programs in the US. And therein comes in the dilemma, because you're looking at a 2-year opportunity loss or maybe a 1-year opportunity loss for some of the programs, and you're really trying to wonder that should people really double down this or just avoid that, right? I mean, so that's something that people have been doing, and in fact, there was a study which talked about that how even if you were to compare with the median salary range to an MBA program, it's actually got prohibitive across the world, because I think education just become that industry right now, So what really is your thought process about that? How should somebody evaluate doing an MBA program, and or should they kind of look at other options, like now you have Coursera, you've got certification course, you've got vocational courses, So some thoughts around that would be very helpful.
Well, I'll give you my own personal experience. Though the times were different, but that equivalent can be reconstructed by today's standards. I joined my career in Hindustan Lever right after IIT. I didn't do an MBA because IIM and all were just coming up. I would have been the first or second or third batch or something if I had done IIM. When I joined Hindustan Lever, there were other people coming from IIM A and C. I think there were only 2 in those days. And they seem to talk far more confidently. When by young age I thought glibly, but I would avoid using that word. Then I could, they could talk about, marketing, distribution, and margins, and I didn't even know what's a bloody gross margin, coming out of an IIT. At that stage, I went to my boss. I was in the computer department. I said, I'm wondering whether I should quit and join an IIM, because, XYZ, these guys talk with a lot more confidence. I'm very hesitant in that subject. So my boss said, well, you could do that. You're young. You're only 22, 23. And with some 2-3 years work experience, you learn more. But I'll tell you one thing. This company, it happens to be lucky for me. This is the kind of thing I don't plan. Hindustan Lever is an IIM included in the business. Meaning we give you so much training that will not add that much value. I am myself, he's telling me, my boss, I'm myself an ordinary BA, BSc graduate from the 50s. I mean, he was 10, 12 years older than I was. And I've learned a lot about management because here they'll send you to training courses. They've got a full-time, it's almost like a little IIM they've got here. And then I realized that in my first 2 years, I went to our training center at Gurita, I think almost every 3 months for 1 week. Finance for non-finance managers, how to do brand marketing, how to get factory productivity on every possible subject. I didn't know what's a balance sheet. I didn't know what's net worth, but I learned it there. And then I come back and try to apply it. And in spite of that, when I was in year 9 or 8 or 9, I said I would like to attend the IIM 3TP program. There's something called 3TP, third 3-tier program. And the company sponsored me. And I went for the highest level of the 3TP. Then when I wanted to go to Harvard, they sent me to Harvard. So each person has to find a route forward. But the purpose of going there is not to get a degree. Because you give up a lot, salary for 2 years, change, discontinue. The purpose of going is to say, whether it helps you to better ingest the lessons of experience you've had in the previous period.
Right.
So every time I went to Gurita, it was after 3 months or 4 months, some things had happened and I was able to absorb. And I became, if I may say so, far more enriched because my mindset was that degree lena nahi hai, seekhna hai. I think I learned a lot more. Likewise, after 8 years when I went to 3TP, I was able to absorb a hell of a lot more because मैंने ये गली में घूमा है पहले उस वक्त मुझे उलझन था कि क्या करे but now I'm feeling better about it. And likewise in Harvard, I got a chance for 8 weeks to sit and say what could I have done better in my job and at least admit to myself, if not to the world, that I had cocked up a few things. So intermittent upgradation, not for the purpose of saying I'm from Princeton. If you can be from Princeton, that's fine. I mean, मुझे बोलने के लिए अच्छा लगता है कि Harvard गया था. I'm not disputing that. But to say that I have been able to be enriched by my own experience through the reflections that I got. See, learning happens through experiences, doing it better and doing it and reflecting on it. The third part of the circle also got completed. So for anybody who thinks that he would like to do it, apply this principle that am I trying to digest? मैं कल का जो दावत खाया है शादी में उसको हजम कर रहा हूँ कि मैं दूसरे दिन की खाना सोच रहा हूँ. And then if you can follow the cycle that you get a chance to reflect on your own experiences are your best teacher, better than a Harvard professor.
Right. I think that's a great perspective. And there's an associated question. Of course, you've answered, you touched upon it, but I'll probably put that across the same. This is actually from Mr. Vijay Sonavane. Mr. Vijay Sonavane is actually a well-known counselor for education. A lot of people in Mumbai go to him. So there's a question from him. What is your advice for the aspiring MBA students from India? While Indian universities are not really insisting for work experience, while top overseas universities are insisting a good work ex of 4 to 5 years, how experience can change the whole learning experience and create value? So I think you touched upon it, but
would love you to double down on that slightly. Yeah.
I think I've touched upon it and answered it effectively, that value addition comes by digesting and reflecting on your own experiences.
Right.
And if you had zero experience, there's nothing to digest. You know, like Amavasya, your stomach is empty and your mind is empty. So I do believe there is some merit in the approach taken by American universities and many others, some in India also, that they give preference to people with some 3-4 years of experience. Otherwise, it's like doing a BA in psychology or physics or economics. Ratta maar ke nikal liya, it's forgotten, you know. And that unfortunately happens. But I think I'm told more and more there are two big changes happening in MBA programs. And if that is so, I'm very happy. One is that the male-female ratio has changed dramatically. It used to be 595 or 298. And nowadays it is, 30-70 or even in some cases 50-50. In the odd case, I've heard people say 55-45. So that's one. Because women bring a fantastic perspective. I'm a great admirer. They think differently. And most of our men think in left brain straight lines. Women think in a different way. I'm not saying it is superior or both. You need both, but you need exposure. And the second thing is, from my experience, I can say that doing education intermittently rather than continuously adds value. And my own experience probably causes me to think this way, that every 10 years, I could come out of the swimming pool, sit by the sun and think before jumping back into the pool again. And I think that's very helpful.
Great, sir. There's a question here from Vinita. And I think it's a great question. He said, are there any mentors or role models who have significantly influenced your career? And what valuable lessons did you learn from them? In fact, if you could probably maybe even highlight that, how could somebody really use mentors to effectively, work with them and to really enrich your lives? Would love your thoughts on that.
That's a very good question from Vinita, I think you said. Mentors are not appointed. They appear. I make it sound like a Mahabharata, some god has appeared. But I literally mean it, because it depends on your frame of mind, not the other person's frame of mind. The best mentors I've had are real life people whom I've reached out and touched. They have instructed me. The people who have inspired me are people I don't know. There's a big difference between inspiration and instruction. So if you say, it's fashionable to say, oh, Gandhiji inspired me, Pandit Nehru inspired me, Narendra Modi inspired me, etc. Inspiration comes from people you don't know and whose flesh you have not touched. And that's also an important part of life. I'm not disputing it. But instruction comes from people who are close to you. For me, some of my bosses, my father, who came up the very hard way, like many of our fathers, a very tough way, but was determined to leave his children in a better state than he, and gave us that value that you leave your children in a better state than what I could give you. Times are changing, India is changing. So I think you have to look for mentors. I'll give you one example so that it doesn't sound, at a certain stage in my career, we were just thinking of starting a family, my wife and I. We had 2-3 transfers. And after 6 months in a particular role in Bombay, the boss called me and said, you have to go to Delhi now. So I said, yeah, Bombay mein ghar milna mushkil hai. I'm talking of the 70s, it's very difficult to get a house in the first place. And I've just settled down. And as I said, my wife and I were thinking of, now we'll be here for some time. Now you're saying, go to Delhi. I had never, lived in Delhi. I knew nothing about Delhi. I went to my big boss, my director. I said, sir, I'm a very small chap. You're a director of the company. मुझे उलझन है इसको ये ट्रांसफर ऑर्डर जरा कैंसिल करा दीजिए. I didn't go to him for mentoring. You know what he told me? He said, Gopal, if you insist, I will speak to, but I know who I'm going to speak to. I'm going to speak to the chairman. Because the chairman has desired that you should go to Delhi. Because the difference between Bombay and Delhi is going to be a hot pot for you. And he thinks well of you, well enough that you should go to the hot pot and survive. Now, I could get scared at that stage. Ki yaar, mujhe wahan pe uljhan mein dal rahe, they'll put me into this hot soup. But his purpose was to tell me that if the chairman's eyes have come on, fallen upon a 27-year-old boy, ये तो बड़ी महत्वपूर्ण चीज है.
Right.
I took that message. Now, the mentorship was my preparedness and his advice. I went to Delhi. And since then, that has always been my guiding principle. That is the water I'm entering in the next place, hotter and different at least from the water I'm leaving. And if it was, I must say, my wife was very kind and she sort of played along with me and followed me everywhere and kept adding her value. I think it worked well. So remember, mentors are not appointed, but they are sought. Mentorship is a matter of what you receive, not by what he gave.
Lovely. And
there have been occasions when I've gone to my bosses, now that we've all retired, and said, sir, you told me this, you remember? He doesn't even remember it. Ki maine aisa kaha kya? Because for you, it was a magical moment. But for him, we just had a conversation. Like the person who told me, when the chairman wants you to go there, you go.
Right. I think lovely thoughts. I mean, mentorship is something that is sought and that is received. I think that really sums up the whole way one should be looking at it. Right?
We somehow think of a mentor like a surgeon, वो बाहर से आएगा, यंत्र तंत्र लेके मुझे कुछ कर देगा, फिर मैं ठीक हो जाऊंगा. That's not the way it is. Just like your own health depends a lot on what attitude you bring to it.
Right. No, great point, sir. So actually moving along, we've obviously in the industry, you would have seen obsolescence happening. You've seen, things, a lot of trends happening over the last, but I think there seems to be obviously an accelerated pace of changes that are happening, and especially now. And I think you really see that with every announcement of AI, chatbot, robots and everything, you find the people entering the workforce now really getting a little, filled with anxiety, saying that, I'm actually a copywriter. I'm actually, an artist. I'm actually an analyst. Will I even have a job 3, 5, 10 years from now? And in fact, at the pace that it is happening, these are not questions that can be dismissive. Like, these are very, very valid points. You also find people entering, let's say, in the 50s or after 45, just trying to stay ahead of the younger workforce. And I know just trying to stay relevant if they've not moved up, also going through this, So any thoughts about how should people be thinking about upskilling and just staying ahead of the trends and not get obsolete by machines and algorithms in that sense?
Every drug has a date expiry. And each of us has a date expiry. I use the word date expiry to not mean that it's finished, the medicine has to be thrown away. Even date expired medicines, their potency may be less than what is declared on the bottle. It has 25 mg of this, that might become 20. And then it's called date expired. So in our careers, all of us know that we are having a date expiry. Like, maut to aana hi hai. Now you try to live as long as you want. Nobody in his senses would say, I'm going to live infinitely. Okay, unless you're a long life research scientist, leave that aside. So that date expiry is something that's going to come to you.
Right.
All that you have influence over is there should be sufficient potency in the beginning that the decay of that potency is delayed. And you do this by being a learning fellow, by welcoming new technologies. Your job will not be there. Even in my days, it was like that. It is not something new. People think AI is going to destroy. What did computers do in the 70s? I remember my early years, one of the things that I found frustrating as a young man is that the unions were totally against it. We were not allowed to import our computer. I set up the computer installation for ICL 1901A, I cancelled it. I then set up one for 360, I cancelled it, which is one of the reasons why I said my timing is wrong for this career back in 69, 70. So I think one should work on the assumption that these are going to, but they don't destroy jobs. They change the nature of the jobs. Now, if you're not willing to change, I remember in the depot, we had guys with a double foolscap sheet with carbon paper, entering truck number 1, 2, 3, 4, 100 cases of Lifebuoy. Now, if you want to do that till you retire, then I'm afraid you don't have a job. But if you're willing to first go to the comptometer, from the comptometer, you went to the facet machine. From the facet machine, you went into punch cards. From the punch cards, you went into, and so on and so forth. So there is a step-by-step opportunity you have to learn what is often touted as discontinuity. The problem arises when we forget those steps. We say, nahi chahiye. Mujhe isse koi matlab nahi hai. Then you find the jump too high. So I said you must learn and you must be a different person this month compared to last month, this year compared to last year. Remember, change has always been there. In fact, my 19th book is on this. It is coming out next year in April. Right. The soft science of transformation. So there are strategy workshops, you'll do that. That's the hard science. The soft science is about the people aspect. And I'm glad you asked this question. I do believe that those who want to change will keep changing. I have a lovely experience here in the Nilgiris where I'm sitting. There's a scholar, there's a butterfly farm here. So wahan jata hun, to there's a little larvae mein hai. Ekdam, it looks like a little haldi, And then slowly it starts moving because the larva has overeaten the leaf, the mulberry leaf. And you know what happens to the larva? Its eyes fall off. Its hands and legs fall off. It develops wings. And one fine day, not that I've watched all this happen in front of me because it takes its own time, it flies out a beautiful butterfly. And people to kavita likhte hain butterfly ke upar. But butterfly ne kitna pain liya hai, usko humko malum nahi hai. So if you're not prepared for pain, don't expect to become a butterfly. And if you keep modernizing yourself by taking the little escalator step, abhi escalator mein nahi jaoge, to chalang maar ke to do male pe to nahi ja sakte ho. Right. And that is the trick. Both for mid-career people at 50, why feel threatened? Treat that youngster of 25 as your son. Do I feel jealous of my son? I'm proud that my son knows more than me.
Right.
And if I take the same attitude, ho sakta hai ki ye mere se aage jayega, it will bring out what your father would have told you. Ki beta, jab main retire hua tha, mera tankha 2000 tha. Ab tum to starting mein 2000 le rahe ho. Right? And that made him proud. He said, my son is earning 2,000 rupees and he's only, and I'm about to retire. But when I retire, I will not be 2,000. I may be 100,000, but I want my son, he'll start at 200,000. So this is pragati, this is progress. Bringing that kind of attitude to young people is very important for older people and not to feel resentful. If you resent your own son, then I think you got a problem.
Right. That's a wonderful perspective, So we are coming up on the hour, but there are two more questions if you could just indulge us with. The first one really is about this whole debate about generalization versus specialization. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think we need to kind of really have a world of generalists so that you end up staying you can avoid obsolescence, or then you super specialize so that you become indispensable? I mean, which is the way one should think of it? Maybe we can go with that first, and then I'll go on to the next one.
You need both. It's like saying in a family, do you want a husband or a wife? You need both. Otherwise, there's no family. Specialists advance the frontiers of knowledge. Generalists apply the new frontiers of knowledge. Specialists are usually bad at application because new knowledge is in multiple boxes, they're sitting in boxes. The ability to cross-integrate them is what a generalist does. So take Robert Oppenheimer, since we talked a bit about Oppenheimer a while ago, and there's a film going on. There's a fabulous book on American Prometheus. Oppenheimer was a specialist. He was a theoretical physicist. He hated laboratory work. And though experimental physicist, thought of him poorly. ये अपने हाथ से कुछ काम नहीं कर सकता है, भाषण दे सकता है. Theoretical physicists were very admiring of his brilliance. But you needed both. And when the atomic bomb had to be made and Project Manhattan was started, when he was chosen to head it, people said, कहाँ से पकड़ के लाया इसको? But he adapted AQ. And the same thing happens in our lives. It doesn't matter whether you're a specialist or you do what your heart tells you and what you enjoy. Ashok Ganguly was a biochemist, PhD from University of Illinois. In 1973 or 72, the then chairman said, this fellow looks like a bright fellow. Send him to the factory to work in the heat and make soap. Initially, the reaction was, well, I'm already PhD from University of Illinois, went there in the 50s and 60s. But he took the challenge. He went and he became the next chairman. So a specialist became a generalist. So always remember, you need human beings who can advance knowledge. You need human beings who can integrate knowledge. The same person may do both, like Robert Oppenheimer did, like Ashok Ganguly did. Some people may be much happier doing whatever they are good at, and they may get the Nobel Prize for that. That's fine.
Right. Wonderful, sir. And just to kind of bring to the close, I mean, your thoughts around work-life balance. Is it a myth, or is it something that actually can be achieved? And your perspective, I mean, you've actually authored 18 books while keeping such senior roles. Just walk us through that whole thought process.
It's too excessive to dismiss it as a myth. But it's equally erroneous to dismiss it as a new gospel. As though this is some big circus act. Work-life balance, yahan se upar se niche gir sakta hai. There is no perfect way to do it. Just like you learn cycling. Do you need a balance? Yes, you do. Otherwise, you'll fall off. But does it mean you should not do cycling? That's also not true.
Right.
You achieve work-life balance by two people or three people in the family, essentially, figuring out where that balance lies. The tension on work-life balance comes when there's a disagreement between the Mia and the Bibi on where that balance lies. If the Mia thinks he's going to come home and get a chai and pakoda at 6 o'clock, and the wife thinks she's also from IIM and rightly wants to also come back 6 o'clock and get pakoda and chai, you have to find other ways. So I think it's very personal. I would hesitate to call it a myth, but I would say it is the elephant in the room of a family, not of a company. And that family has to sort it out. I give you one example. When I was offered chairmanship of Saudi Arabia, of the Arab Peninsula, back in 1989-90, my concern was for my wife and my daughters who were 10, 12 years old at that time. Because life in Jeddah can be quite oppressive in those days. But to be fair, my wife said, because there was no savings in the house. I mean, I had worked already for so many years without any savings. My wife said, if it will help you to save money so that we can send our children to study where they want to, I will undertake the oppression of living there. Now, she made that compromise and it helped me to go there. And indeed, I could save more money than I earned in the whole time I was in India, because life was different. And my children could go and study wherever they wanted to. Now, today we sit back at our age and say, "Theek kiya humne." But I don't know. If my wife had said no, we wouldn't have gone, and maybe outcomes would have been different. They may not have been worse, but I can't tell. So the work-life balance is a strictly personal matter between a Mia and a Bibi and his children and the demands. And I greatly admire people who have a mother to look after or a child who's challenged in some way, who turn down opportunities because that is their priority. And I think that's equally honorable. I don't think poorly of them at all. Everybody doesn't have to be the chairman or the managing director. Work-life balance is in the personal domain, not in the office domain.
Wonderful, sir. I mean, this was absolutely fantastic. I didn't even realize how the hour flew by. I wish you could look at the chat. I mean, everybody out there has just been thanking you. I mean, people are saying such words of wisdom. This has been fantastic. Would love you if you could probably visit the chat later on. You'll probably see it. But thank you so much, sir, for your time. Really,
Now,
really.
forgive me for being a dumbo. How do I get to the chat?
We'll just work it out for you after this. We'll just help you download the app and get you there. But would love to have you on Thinkly again, and would love to actually meet you in person whenever you're back in Mumbai, sir.
Sure. Thank you very much for hosting me, and all the best.